The sky above Shafter, Texas turned a peculiar shade of copper that morning in June of 1881, and Tamsin Hartley knew exactly what it meant, while every other soul in town went about their business as if the heavens themselves were not screaming warnings. She stood outside the general store where she had just purchased flour and sugar, her worn calico dress fluttering against her legs as the wind picked up with an urgency that made her pulse quicken. The air tasted metallic, heavy with moisture that had no business being there in the midst of what everyone else believed would be another scorching summer day. Tamsin had learned to read the weather from her grandmother, a woman who had possessed an uncanny ability to predict storms, droughts, and temperature shifts days before they arrived. While other folks relied on almanacs and guesswork, her grandmother had taught her to observe the smallest details in the natural world: the way birds flew, the color of clouds at dawn, the behavior of insects, the feel of wind against skin, and dozens of other subtle signs that most people never noticed. After her grandmother passed 2 years ago, Tamsin had continued honing this skill, and she had never been wrong, not once. She clutched her packages tighter and hurried down the dusty main street, her mind racing. The copper sky, the sudden shift in wind direction, the way the temperature had dropped 5 degrees in the past hour, and the strange stillness from the cattle in the holding pens near the edge of town all pointed to one thing: a massive storm was coming, and it would arrive far sooner than anyone expected. This was not just any summer thunderstorm. This was the kind of weather event that could destroy crops, flood arroyos, and most critically, scatter or drown livestock caught in the open range. Tamsin lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of Shafter, a town that had grown up around silver mining and cattle ranching in the harsh West Texas landscape. Her parents had died of fever when she was 16, leaving her with just enough money to survive if she was careful. She took in sewing, did laundry for some of the wealthier families, and sold vegetables from her small garden. At 22 years old, she had become accustomed to solitude and self-reliance, though sometimes the loneliness cut deeper than she cared to admit. As she walked past the Silver Dollar Saloon, she heard laughter and the plinking of an out-of-tune piano. Men were drinking even though it was barely noon, celebrating something or drowning sorrows as they always did. She quickened her pace, knowing that none of them would listen to her even if she tried to warn them. She had attempted to share her weather predictions before, only to be met with condescending smiles and dismissive comments about women's intuition and superstition. But there was one person who might listen, though she barely knew him. Dawson Aldridge ran one of the largest cattle operations in the area, with nearly 3,000 head of longhorned cattle grazing on the open range northwest of town. She had seen him in Shafter numerous times over the past year, a tall man in his mid-20s with sun-darkened skin and intelligent dark eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. He was always polite, always respectful, and unlike many of the other ranchers and cowboys, he never spoke to her as if she were simple-minded just because she was a woman. Tamsin had exchanged perhaps a dozen words with Dawson Aldridge total, mostly pleasantries when their paths crossed at the general store or the feed depot. But she had heard things about him. He was known as a fair boss who paid his workers decent wages and did not cheat people in business dealings. He had inherited the ranch from his father 3 years ago and had built it into something even more successful through hard work and smart decisions. Some of the other ranchers resented him for his success, but no one could deny that he knew cattle and land management better than most men twice his age. She had to find him. His cattle were out on the range, and if the storm hit the way she knew it would, they would be in grave danger. Flash floods were common in this part of Texas when heavy rains came, and the arroyos could fill with rushing water in minutes, drowning anything in their path. Beyond that, frightened cattle could stampede, injuring themselves and scattering so far that it would take weeks to round them up again if they could be found at all. Tamsin changed direction and headed toward the Aldridge Ranch, which lay 3 miles outside of town. The packages in her arms grew heavy, but she did not slow down. The wind continued to build, and she could see dark clouds beginning to mass on the western horizon. Most people would not recognize those clouds for what they were, not yet, but Tamsin could see the characteristic anvil shape forming, the way they churned and built upon themselves with frightening speed. By the time she reached the ranch entrance, marked by a wooden arch with the Aldridge brand burned into it, sweat dampened her dress despite the cooling temperature. The ranch house was a sturdy adobe structure with a wide porch, surrounded by corrals, barns, and bunkhouses. Several horses stood in one of the corrals, and she could see a few ranch hands working near one of the barns, but there was no sign of Dawson himself. A Mexican ranch hand noticed her approach and walked over, his expression curious. He was an older man with gray streaking his dark hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent his entire life outdoors. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked in accented English, his tone polite but cautious. Women rarely came to the ranch alone. "I need to speak with Mr. Aldridge," Tamsin said, trying to keep her voice steady despite her breathlessness from the long walk. "It is urgent." The ranch hand studied her for a moment, then nodded. "He is out checking the southern fence line, but he should be back soon. You can wait on the porch if you like." Tamsin shook her head. "There is no time. How far out is he?" "Maybe 2 miles, miss, but the boss, he will not want you riding out alone." "I am not asking for permission," Tamsin said, more sharply than she intended. She softened her tone. "Please, I need a horse. There is a storm coming, a bad one, and it will hit within hours. His cattle are in danger." The ranch hand's eyes widened slightly, and he glanced at the sky. To him, it probably still looked like a typical summer day with some clouds building. But something in Tamsin's urgency must have convinced him, because he nodded slowly. "I will take you to him myself," he said. "I am Miguel, the foreman here. If you are right about the storm, the boss will want to know immediately." Relief flooded through Tamsin. "Thank you." Miguel quickly saddled 2 horses, and within minutes they were riding south across the scrubby grassland. Tamsin was not an experienced rider, but she managed to keep up, gripping the saddle horn tightly as the horse moved beneath her. Miguel set a fast pace, clearly taking her warning seriously, even if he did not fully understand it yet. They found Dawson Aldridge near a section of fence that had been damaged, probably by cattle rubbing against it or by some animal trying to get through. He was working with another ranch hand to repair the posts, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his hat pushed back on his head. When he saw Miguel approaching with Tamsin, he straightened immediately, his expression shifting to concern. "Miguel, what is wrong?" he called out as they drew closer. "This lady, she says there is a storm coming, boss. A bad one." Dawson's gaze shifted to Tamsin, and she saw recognition in his eyes. He knew who she was, even if they had never had a real conversation. She dismounted awkwardly, nearly losing her balance, but caught herself. "Mr. Aldridge," she said quickly, not wanting to waste time on formalities. "There is a severe storm approaching from the west. It will be here in less than 3 hours, possibly sooner. Your cattle are in danger." Dawson looked at the sky, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive. "The sky looks relatively clear," he said slowly, but there was no mockery in his tone. He was simply stating an observation. "It will not be clear for long," Tamsin said urgently. "Look at the western horizon. Those clouds are building fast, and they have the characteristic shape of a supercell storm. The wind has shifted direction in the past 2 hours, the temperature has dropped, and the air pressure is falling rapidly. I know you have no reason to trust my judgment, but I am begging you to move your herd to higher ground immediately." Dawson studied her face for a long moment, and Tamsin felt heat rise to her cheeks under his scrutiny. His eyes were the color of dark coffee, and they held an intelligence that made her think he was actually considering her words rather than dismissing them outright. "You are Miss Hartley, correct? You live in the house near the old Miller property." "Yes, but that is not important right now. Your cattle." "How do you know about the storm?" Dawson interrupted, but his tone was genuinely curious rather than challenging. "My grandmother taught me to read weather patterns," Tamsin explained quickly. "I know it sounds strange, but I've been doing this my whole life. I have predicted every major storm in this area for the past 2 years, and I have never been wrong. Please, Mr. Aldridge, you have to trust me." Dawson turned to Miguel. "What do you think?" The foreman glanced at the sky again, then at Tamsin. The lady, she seems very certain, and I have learned in my years not to ignore warnings even from unexpected sources. The other ranch hand, a young man who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Boss, the cattle have been acting strange all morning. More skittish than usual?" That seemed to decide it. Dawson nodded sharply. "All right, Miguel, ride back to the ranch and gather every available man. We need to move the herd to the high ground near the northern ridge. That is the safest area if flooding occurs. Send riders to the line camps to bring in everyone. We do not have much time." Miguel nodded and immediately spurred his horse into a gallop back toward the ranch house. Dawson turned to the other ranch hand. "Charlie, you go with him. I will ride out to start moving the nearest sections of the herd." Charlie took off as well, leaving Dawson and Tamsin alone. Dawson looked at her, and for the first time since she had arrived, he smiled slightly. "I hope you're right about this, Miss Hartley. Moving 3,000 head of cattle is not a small undertaking." "I am right," Tamsin said firmly. "I wish I were not, but I am." "Can you ride well enough to come with me? I could use someone to help start pushing the cattle in the right direction." Tamsin hesitated. She was not a skilled rider, and she had never worked with cattle before, but she also could not simply leave now. "I can try," she said. Dawson's smile widened just a fraction. "That is good enough for me. Come on." They rode together across the range, and Tamsin was struck by how vast the Aldridge property was. Cattle dotted the landscape in small clusters, grazing on the sparse grass and brush. The wind had picked up even more, and she could see the clouds building faster now, great towers of white and gray that were beginning to take on a greenish tint. That color meant hail, possibly large hail, and it reinforced her certainty that this storm would be dangerous. Dawson was an efficient, calm presence beside her. He explained quickly what they needed to do, how to move the cattle by riding behind them and using calls and whistles to direct them. Tamsin did her best to follow his instructions, though several times she nearly lost her seat when her horse moved suddenly to cut off a stray cow. Within 30 minutes, other riders began arriving, ranch hands from various parts of the property who had received Miguel's urgent message. Dawson organized them quickly, dividing them into groups and assigning each group a section of the range to clear. His commands were clear and confident, and the men responded without question. Tamsin could see why his ranch was so successful. He was a natural leader who remained calm under pressure. "Miss Hartley, stay with me," Dawson called out to her. "I do not want you getting lost or hurt out here." She urged her horse closer to his, grateful for the guidance. The sky was darkening rapidly now, and even the ranch hands were beginning to look nervous. The wind had become almost violent, whipping up dust and debris. In the distance, Tamsin could see the leading edge of the storm, a dark wall of rain that seemed to be racing toward them. "We are running out of time," she said urgently. "I know," Dawson replied, his jaw set with determination, "but we will get as many as we can to safety." For the next hour, Tamsin experienced some of the most intense and frightening moments of her life. The cattle, sensing the approaching storm, became increasingly difficult to manage. They wanted to run in every direction except the one the riders were trying to push them. Several times, small groups broke away and had to be chased down and redirected. The physical exertion was enormous, and Tamsin's arms and legs ached from gripping the horse and trying to maintain control. Thunder began to rumble in the distance, deep and ominous. The wind was so strong now that it was hard to hear anything else. Dawson stayed close to Tamsin, always within sight, and she found his presence reassuring even as fear gripped her heart. She had never been out in the open range during a storm like this, and she was beginning to realize just how vulnerable they were. "The ridge is just ahead," Dawson shouted over the wind. "Once we get them there, we need to find shelter ourselves." Tamsin could see the high ground he meant, a rocky area that rose above the surrounding flatland. It would not flood there, and the cattle would have some protection from the worst of the wind. The ranch hands were doing an impressive job of funneling the animals toward that location, working together with practiced efficiency. Just as the first raindrops began to fall, huge and heavy, most of the herd reached the ridge. Dawson rode along the perimeter, counting and assessing. Even in the chaos, he was trying to determine how many cattle they had managed to save. Tamsin's dress was soaked within seconds as the rain intensified, going from a few drops to a torrential downpour almost instantly. "We need to get to the line camp," Dawson shouted, pointing to a small structure about half a mile away. "It is too dangerous to try to make it back to the ranch house." Tamsin nodded, unable to speak. Her teeth were already chattering from the sudden cold. The temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees and the rain was icy. Dawson gathered his men with hand signals and shouts, and the entire group began riding toward the line camp, a small cabin used by ranch hands who were working distant parts of the range. Lightning split the sky, brilliant and terrifying, followed almost immediately by thunder so loud it felt like the earth itself was shaking. Tamsin's horse spooked, rearing up, and she felt herself sliding from the saddle. Strong hands grabbed her waist, steadying her, and she realized Dawson had moved his horse alongside hers and was holding her in place. "I have got you," he shouted. "Just hold on." They made it to the line camp just as hail began to fall, chunks of ice the size of walnuts that pelted them painfully. Everyone crowded into the small cabin, which was barely large enough for all of them. There were 8 men total, plus Tamsin and Dawson. The interior was sparse, just a few bunks, a small stove, and some basic supplies, but it was shelter. Water dripped from everyone's clothes and hair, forming puddles on the wooden floor. Outside, the storm raged with a fury that made the cabin walls shudder. The hail was so loud against the roof that conversation was nearly impossible. Tamsin stood near the door, shivering violently, and watched as Dawson moved among his men, checking that everyone had made it safely, that no one was injured. Miguel found a couple of blankets in one of the trunks and handed one to Tamsin. "Here, miss. You need to get warm." "Thank you," she managed through chattering teeth, wrapping the rough wool around her shoulders. Dawson appeared beside her, his dark hair plastered to his head, his shirt clinging to his broad shoulders. "Are you all right, Miss Hartley?" "I am fine," Tamsin said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, and she felt shaky and exhausted. "Your cattle. Did we get most of them to safety?" "I believe so," Dawson said. "Thanks to your warning, we probably saved the majority of the herd. If this storm had caught us unprepared, it would have been catastrophic." He paused, his eyes searching her face. "You were right about everything, the timing, the severity, all of it. How did you know?" Tamsin shrugged slightly, pulling the blanket tighter. "I told you. My grandmother taught me. She could read the weather better than anyone I have ever known, and she passed that knowledge to me. Most people think it is nonsense." "I do not think it is nonsense," Dawson said quietly. "I think it is remarkable. You rode all the way out to my ranch to warn me, even though we barely know each other. You helped move the cattle even though you are not experienced with ranch work. You may have saved my entire operation, Miss Hartley." Tamsin felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the blanket. The way he was looking at her with genuine respect and gratitude made her feel seen in a way she had not experienced in years. "I could not let your animals suffer if I could prevent it," she said softly. "It would not have been right." The storm continued for another 2 hours, and during that time the occupants of the line camp settled in as best they could. Someone got the stove going and coffee was made. The ranch hands shared stories and jokes to pass the time, their initial nervousness giving way to the camaraderie of men who had faced danger together and survived. Tamsin found herself sitting on one of the bunks, still wrapped in the blanket, with Dawson sitting beside her. "Tell me more about your grandmother," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear over the noise of the storm and the chatter of the men. Tamsin found herself talking about her grandmother, about the summers she had spent learning to observe the natural world, about the way the old woman had known things that seemed impossible. She talked about her parents, about the fever that had taken them, about the loneliness of the years since. Dawson listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, and in turn he told her about his own family. His father had built the ranch from nothing, starting with just 100 head of cattle and a fierce determination. His mother had died giving birth to him, and his father had never remarried, pouring all his energy into the ranch and into raising his son. "He taught me everything I know about cattle and land," Dawson said, staring at the coffee cup in his hands. "When he passed, I was afraid I would fail him, that I could not live up to what he had built, but I have tried my best to honor his legacy." "I think you have done more than that," Tamsin said gently. "From what I have heard, you have made the ranch even more successful." Dawson looked at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. "It does not mean much if I have no one to share it with," he said quietly. "Building something successful is satisfying, but it is also lonely." Tamsin understood that loneliness all too well. "Yes," she whispered, "it is." Their eyes met, and Tamsin felt something shift between them, a recognition of kindred spirits who had both been alone for too long. The moment stretched out, filled with unspoken possibilities, until one of the ranch hands called out that the storm seemed to be lessening. Indeed, the hail had stopped, and the rain was beginning to ease. The thunder was more distant now, rumbling away toward the east. Dawson stood and looked out the window, assessing the conditions. "We should check on the herd, and then try to get back to the ranch house before dark," he said. "The ground will be muddy, so we need to be careful." The group emerged from the cabin to find the landscape transformed. Water stood in pools everywhere, and the normally dry arroyos were rushing with muddy torrents. Hailstones still littered the ground, melting slowly in the late afternoon heat that was beginning to return. Dawson had been right to move the cattle to high ground. The areas where they had been grazing earlier were now flooded, and anything caught there would have been in serious danger. They rode to the ridge where the herd had been pushed, and Tamsin felt relief when she saw that the cattle were still there, huddled together but safe. Some of the animals had scattered during the storm, but the majority had remained where they were driven. The ranch hands began the work of assessing the herd and determining what losses, if any, had occurred. Dawson rode over to Tamsin, a smile of genuine relief on his face. "We did it," he said. "We saved them." "You did it," Tamsin corrected. "I just provided the warning. You and your men did all the hard work." "The warning was everything," Dawson insisted. "Without it, I would have lost hundreds of head, maybe more. Miss Hartley, I owe you a debt I am not sure I can ever repay." Tamsin felt her cheeks warm. "You do not owe me anything, Mr. Aldridge. I'm just glad the animals are safe." As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the wet landscape in gold and orange light, Dawson insisted on personally escorting Tamsin back to her home. He assigned Miguel to oversee the continued assessment of the herd and the cleanup from the storm, and then he and Tamsin rode together toward Shafter. The ride was slower than the frantic rush earlier, and they talked more easily now, the shared experience of the storm having created a bond between them. Dawson asked about her work, about her life in town, and he seemed genuinely interested in her answers. Tamsin found herself relaxing in his presence, appreciating his steady calmness and the intelligence in his questions. When they reached her small house on the edge of town, Dawson dismounted and helped her down from her horse. His hands lingered on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary, and Tamsin's breath caught in her throat. "Thank you again, Miss Hartley," he said softly, "for everything you did today." "You are welcome, Mr. Aldridge. Please call me Dawson." Tamsin smiled. "Only if you call me Tamsin." "Tamsin," he repeated, as if testing how her name felt on his tongue. "It is a beautiful name." They stood there in the fading light, neither quite ready to say goodbye. Finally, Dawson cleared his throat. "May I call on you properly, I mean? I would like to take you to dinner, if you would allow it." Tamsin's heart soared. "I would like that very much." "Tomorrow evening, then? I will come by at 6? 6 would be perfect." Dawson smiled, a genuine warm expression that transformed his entire face. "Until tomorrow, then. Good night, Tamsin." "Good night, Dawson." She watched him ride away, and even though she was exhausted, filthy, and still damp from the storm, Tamsin felt happier than she had in years. She went inside her small house and immediately began preparing for the next day, her mind already spinning with anticipation. The following evening, Dawson arrived precisely at 6, dressed in clean clothes and with his hair neatly combed. He had shaved, and Tamsin noticed that he looked younger without the rough stubble he had worn the day before. She had put on her best dress, a simple but flattering blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, and she had spent an hour arranging her long, dark hair. "You look beautiful," Dawson said when she opened the door, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." They went to the only real restaurant in Shafter, a small establishment run by a German couple who served hearty food and strong coffee. Over dinner, they continued the conversations they had begun the day before, discovering more about each other with every passing minute. Tamsin learned that Dawson loved to read, that he had a collection of books in his ranch house that would rival any library in Texas. He learned that she had always wanted to travel, to see the ocean and the mountains, places she had only read about in books. "Maybe someday you will," Dawson said. "See those places, I mean." "Maybe," Tamsin agreed, though she knew her limited means made such dreams unlikely. After dinner, they walked through the town, enjoying the cool evening air. The storm had left everything fresh and clean, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. When they reached Tamsin's house, Dawson took her hand gently. "I have not enjoyed an evening this much in longer than I can remember," he said. "Would you allow me to see you again?" "Yes," Tamsin said without hesitation. "I would like that very much." Over the following weeks, Dawson became a regular presence in Tamsin's life. He came to town whenever his ranch duties allowed, and they spent every possible moment together. Sometimes they went to dinner, sometimes they simply walked and talked, and sometimes Dawson brought books from his collection to share with her. He was courting her properly, with a gentleness and respect that Tamsin found deeply appealing. She also visited the ranch several times, and she began to understand the scope of Dawson's operation. The ranch was impressive, covering thousands of acres of harsh but beautiful Texas landscape. The ranch hands clearly respected their boss, and they accepted Tamsin's presence without judgment or resentment. Miguel in particular seemed pleased by the developing relationship, often giving Tamsin knowing smiles when Dawson was not looking. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after the storm, Tamsin was at the ranch when she noticed the cattle acting strangely again. They were bunched together in the corrals, restless and vocal. The horses, too, seemed agitated. She stepped out onto the porch of the ranch house and looked at the sky, her senses immediately alert. "Dawson," she called out, and he emerged from the house, concern on his face. "What is it?" "Another storm is coming," she said, her voice certain. "Not as severe as the last one, but it will bring heavy rain and possibly flooding. We have maybe 4 or 5 hours. Dawson did not hesitate. He immediately began issuing orders to his men, and within an hour, precautions were being taken across the ranch. The cattle in the lower pastures were moved to higher ground, equipment was secured, and everyone prepared for the storm. When it hit that evening, it was exactly as Tamsin had predicted, a heavy but not catastrophic rainfall that lasted several hours. After that, Dawson began consulting Tamsin regularly about weather conditions. Her predictions became an invaluable tool for managing the ranch, allowing him to make decisions about moving cattle, planting feed crops, and preparing for severe weather events days in advance. Word began to spread among other ranchers about Tamsin's abilities, and several of them approached her for advice. At first she was hesitant, remembering the dismissive treatment she had received in the past, but Dawson encouraged her. "You have a gift," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch of his ranch house, watching the sunset. "Other people should benefit from it. You could help a lot of ranchers avoid losses, and you deserve to be compensated for your knowledge." "Do you think people would actually pay me for weather predictions?" Tamsin asked doubtfully. "I know they would," Dawson said firmly. "You have saved me thousands of dollars already. That has value." And so, tentatively, Tamsin began offering her services to other ranchers and farmers in the area. She charged modest fees for her predictions, and to her surprise, people were willing to pay. Her accuracy was remarkable, and within a few months she had established a small but steady income from her weather reading. It gave her a sense of independence and purpose that she had not felt since her grandmother died. As summer turned to fall, the relationship between Tamsin and Dawson deepened into something neither of them could deny. They were falling in love, thoroughly and completely. Tamsin found herself thinking about him constantly when they were apart, and the days when she did not see him felt empty and long. Dawson was equally smitten, and his ranch hands teased him good-naturedly about his distraction and the frequency with which he found reasons to ride into town. One evening in late October, Dawson took Tamsin to a spot on his ranch that he said was his favorite place. It was a small rise overlooking a valley with a view that stretched for miles in every direction. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, and the air was cool and fresh. "I used to come here with my father," Dawson said quietly as they stood together, his arm around her waist. "He would talk to me about the ranch, about life, about what it meant to be a good man. I have not brought anyone else here before." Tamsin leaned into him, feeling the strength and warmth of his body. "Thank you for sharing it with me." Dawson turned to face her, his dark eyes intense. "Tamsin, these past few months have been the happiest of my life. You have changed everything for me. The ranch is still important, but it does not feel like the only thing anymore. You make me want things I did not think I could have." "What things?" Tamsin asked softly, though her heart was already racing with hope. "A family, a partner, someone to share the good days and the hard days, someone to grow old with." He took her hands in his grip gentle but firm. "I love you, Tamsin. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you rode out to warn me about that storm, putting yourself at risk to help me save my herd. You are the bravest, smartest, most remarkable woman I have ever known." Tears pricked at Tamsin's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have loved you for weeks now, but I was afraid to say it." "Do not be afraid," Dawson said, lifting one hand to cup her cheek. "Not with me, never with me." He kissed her then, soft and sweet at first, then deeper as Tamsin wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled him closer. It was everything she had dreamed a first kiss should be, full of passion and promise and profound connection. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. "Marry me," Dawson said, his forehead resting against hers. "Be my wife. Build a life with me. I know it is fast, but when something is right, you just know. And this is right, Tamsin. You and me, we are right." "Yes," Tamsin said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." The joy on Dawson's face was radiant. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing with pure happiness. When he set her down, he kissed her again, and Tamsin felt as if her heart might burst from the sheer magnitude of her feelings. They were married 6 weeks later, in early December of 1881, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Shafter. Miguel served as Dawson's best man, and one of the women Tamsin did laundry for stood up as her witness. It was a small gathering, but it was perfect. Tamsin wore a new dress that Dawson had insisted on buying for her, made of cream-colored silk that made her feel like a princess. Dawson wore his best suit, and he could not stop smiling the entire day. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at the ranch. All of Dawson's ranch hands attended, along with several neighboring ranchers and their families, and people from town who had come to appreciate Tamsin's weather predictions. There was food and music and dancing, and Tamsin felt surrounded by warmth and acceptance in a way she had never experienced before. That night, as Tamsin and Dawson lay together in the large bedroom of the ranch house that was now her home, she felt a sense of completeness that she had not known was possible. Dawson held her close, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her skin. "Are you happy?" he murmured against her hair. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Tamsin replied honestly. "You have given me everything I never dared to dream of." "You have given me the same," Dawson said. "I was so alone before you came into my life. I had the ranch, I had success, but I did not have a reason beyond just survival and obligation. You are my reason now, Tamsin. You and the life we are going to build together." The first year of their marriage was a time of adjustment and joy. Tamsin took on the role of ranch wife with enthusiasm, learning the details of managing a large household and supporting Dawson in his work. She continued to provide weather predictions, which proved invaluable not just for the Aldridge Ranch, but for the entire community. Her accuracy became almost legendary, and people came from miles away to consult with her. Dawson expanded the ranch, buying adjacent land as it became available and increasing the size of the herd. With Tamsin's weather predictions allowing him to make informed decisions about when to move cattle, when to prepare for storms, and when conditions would be ideal for various ranch activities, his operation became even more profitable. But more than that, he was simply happy. Having Tamsin in his life transformed everything, making each day brighter and more meaningful. In the spring of 1882, Tamsin discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when she finally confirmed it with the doctor in town, she was overwhelmed with emotion. She had always wanted children, but after losing her parents so young, she had feared she might never have a family of her own. She told Dawson that evening after dinner, when they were sitting together on the porch watching the stars emerge. "I have some news," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Dawson looked at her, immediately alert to the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Tamsin assured him quickly. "Better than fine, actually. Dawson, I'm going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Dawson just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a smile spread across his face, wide and joyful and full of wonder. "A baby," he repeated. "We are going to be parents." "Yes," Tamsin said, laughing at his stunned expression. "In about 6 months, if the doctor is right." Dawson pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly but carefully, as if she were made of something fragile. "I love you so much," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. Thank you for this gift, for our child, for everything." Tamsin held him just as tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I love you too," she whispered. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Dawson was attentive to the point of being overprotective. He did not want Tamsin to do anything that might be too strenuous, though she assured him repeatedly that she was perfectly healthy and capable. She continued to read the weather, though as her belly grew larger, she spent more time giving consultations from the ranch house rather than riding out to observe conditions directly. In late November of 1882, their son was born. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Dawson feared he might lose Tamsin, but she was strong, stronger than he had known, and when the baby finally arrived, crying lustily and perfect in every way, both parents wept with relief and joy. They named him Daniel, after Dawson's father, and from the moment Dawson first held his son, he was completely devoted. Daniel had Tamsin's blue eyes and Dawson's dark hair, and he was healthy and strong. Tamsin recovered well from the birth, and she took to motherhood with the same capability she brought to everything else in her life. Watching Dawson with their son filled Tamsin with a love so profound it almost hurt. He was a natural father, gentle and patient, and he made time every single day to hold Daniel, to talk to him, to simply be present. The ranch continued to thrive, but Dawson made it clear that his family came first always. As Daniel grew from an infant to a toddler, the ranch house filled with laughter and life. Tamsin continued her weather reading, now with a toddler often playing at her feet as she made her observations and calculations. She had developed a reputation that extended far beyond Shafter, and ranchers from across West Texas sought her advice. She charged fair prices for her services, and the income she generated was substantial. Dawson was proud of her success, never threatened by her independence or capability. When Daniel was 2 years old, Tamsin became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1885 they welcomed a daughter into the world. They named her Grace, and she had Dawson's dark eyes and Tamsin's delicate features. Daniel was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help take care of her, and the family dynamic shifted and expanded to include this new little person. The ranch continued to prosper, growing into one of the largest and most successful operations in the region. Dawson's reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle spread, and he began to serve as an informal leader among the local ranching community. People respected his judgment and sought his advice on matters beyond just cattle. Tamsin's weather predictions remained a crucial part of the ranch's success, allowing them to avoid disasters and capitalize on favorable conditions. Life was not without challenges. There were droughts and economic downturns, there were difficulties with rustlers and disputes over water rights, and there were the normal struggles of raising children and managing a large property. But Tamsin and Dawson faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. One evening in the summer of 1887, when Daniel was 4 and Grace was 2, Tamsin and Dawson sat on their porch after the children had been put to bed. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of each day, a chance to reconnect and simply be together. "Do you ever think about that day?" Dawson asked, his arm around Tamsin's shoulders. "The day you rode out to warn me about the storm?" "Of course," Tamsin said. "That was the day everything changed." "I think about it all the time," Dawson admitted. "How different my life would be if you had not made that choice, if you had just stayed home and let the storm come. I would have lost so much that day, not just cattle, but potentially the entire ranch. And I never would have gotten to know you, never would have had this life with you." Tamsin tilted her head to look up at him. "Do you think it was fate? That we were meant to find each other?" "I do not know if I believe in fate," Dawson said thoughtfully. "But I believe that you made a brave choice that day, and that choice created a possibility that did not exist before. You changed the course of both of our lives because you were willing to act on what you knew was right." "I was terrified," Tamsin admitted. "I barely knew you, and I thought you might dismiss me the way so many other people had, but I could not live with myself if I did not at least try." "I am so grateful you tried," Dawson said softly. "You saved more than my herd that day, Tamsin. You saved me from a life of loneliness. You gave me everything that matters." Tamsin felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind of tears that came from overwhelming love and gratitude. "You gave me the same," she said. "A home, a family, a purpose. You believed in me when no one else did. You saw value in my abilities instead of dismissing them as strange or unnatural. You gave me a place where I belong." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the evening. Cattle lowing in the distance, a dog barking somewhere on the property, the wind rustling through the sparse trees near the house. It was a peaceful symphony, the sound of home and safety and contentment. "I want to expand the weather prediction service," Tamsin said after a while. "I have been thinking about it for months now. There are so many people who could benefit from accurate forecasts, not just ranchers, but farmers, merchants, even the railroad. I could document my methods, maybe even train others to observe the signs I look for." Dawson smiled. "I think that is a wonderful idea. You have a gift that could help so many people. We could build a separate building for it, a proper office where you could meet with clients and keep your records. I will support you in whatever you want to do, Tamsin. Even if it means I am busier, less available sometimes." "Even then," Dawson assured her. "Though I will miss you when you're occupied with work, I would never want to hold you back from pursuing something meaningful to you. Your success is my success. Your happiness is my happiness." Over the next several years, Tamsin did exactly what she had proposed. She established what became known as the Hartley Weather Service, named after her maiden name at Dawson's insistence that she should have recognition in her own right. She hired and trained assistants who could help with the observations and record keeping. She developed a system of written forecasts that were distributed throughout the region. Ranchers and farmers planned their activities around her predictions, and the accuracy of her forecasts became renowned. The service brought in substantial income, which Tamsin used partly to expand the business and partly to support charitable causes in Shafter and the surrounding area. She established a small school for children whose families could not afford education, and she provided assistance to widows and families who had fallen on hard times. Dawson supported all of these endeavors, proud of the woman his wife had become and the positive impact she was having on their community. their family grew as well. In 1889, they welcomed another son, whom they named Thomas. In 1891, a second daughter arrived, named Sarah. The ranch house was always filled with noise and activity, with children running and playing, and Tamsin often marveled at how full her life had become. She, who had been so alone for so many years, now had a husband she adored and 4 beautiful children who filled every day with joy and chaos. Dawson was an involved, loving father who made time for each of his children individually. He taught Daniel about ranching and cattle, taking the boy with him on rides across the property and explaining the business side of the operation. He was gentle and patient with Grace, encouraging her love of reading and learning. Thomas inherited his father's calm temperament, and Sarah was spirited and bold, already showing signs of her mother's intuitive understanding of the natural world. As the children grew older, Tamsin began teaching them about weather reading, particularly Sarah, who showed a strong aptitude for it. She would take them out to observe clouds and wind patterns, to listen to the sounds of animals and insects, to develop the same awareness of the natural world that her grandmother had taught her. It gave her deep satisfaction to pass on this knowledge, to know that it would not be lost when she was gone. The ranch continued to thrive into the 1890s, adapting to changing markets and conditions. Dawson began to diversify, adding sheep and horses to the operation, and he invested in water management systems that allowed the ranch to weather droughts better than their neighbors. His success was due in large part to having advanced knowledge of weather conditions, which allowed him to make strategic decisions about stock management and resource allocation. But beyond the material success, what mattered most to both Tamsin and Dawson was the life they had built together. Their marriage remained strong and loving, weathering the inevitable challenges that came with years of partnership. They still made time for those evening conversations on the porch, still found moments of intimacy and connection amid the busy demands of work and family. One particularly memorable event occurred in the spring of 1893, when a severe drought threatened the entire region. Water sources were drying up, and many ranchers were facing the prospect of losing their herds. Tamsin had been monitoring the conditions closely, and she predicted that a major weather pattern shift was coming that would bring substantial rain, but not for another 3 weeks. She advised Dawson and other ranchers who consulted her to conserve water resources carefully and to move cattle to areas where they could access the limited water that remained. It was difficult advice to follow, requiring significant effort and expense, and some ranchers questioned whether it was worth it. But those who trusted Tamsin's prediction followed her guidance. 3 weeks later, almost to the day, the weather pattern shifted exactly as she had predicted. A series of storms moved through the region, bringing heavy but not destructive rainfall that replenished water sources and revived the parched grasslands. The ranchers who had followed Tamsin's advice came through the drought with minimal losses, those who had not suffered significantly. The event cemented Tamsin's reputation as someone whose predictions could be trusted absolutely, and it also demonstrated the real economic value of accurate weather forecasting. The Hartley Weather Service expanded even further, and Tamsin began corresponding with meteorologists in the East who were trying to develop more scientific approaches to weather prediction. She shared her observational methods and, in turn, learned from their theoretical frameworks. The combination of her intuitive, experiential knowledge and the emerging science of meteorology made her forecasts even more accurate. As the 19th century drew to a close, Tamsin and Dawson's children were growing into young adults. Daniel, now in his late teens, was being groomed to eventually take over the ranch. He had inherited his father's business acumen and his mother's attention to detail, and he showed every sign of being able to continue the family legacy. Grace was interested in teaching and wanted to attend a college in the East, something Tamsin and Dawson fully supported despite the fact that it would mean she would be far from home. Thomas showed an interest in the technical side of the weather service, fascinated by the instruments and record-keeping systems his mother used. Sarah, now 8 years old, was already demonstrating weather-reading abilities that Tamsin believed might eventually surpass her own. The girl had an almost uncanny sense for atmospheric changes, often commenting on coming weather before even her mother noticed the signs. On a warm evening in June of 1898, Tamsin and Dawson celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary with a private dinner, just the two of them. The children had been sent to stay with Miguel's family for the night, giving their parents a rare evening alone. 16 years, Dawson mused, as they sat together after dinner, his hand clasped with Tamsin's. It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all. I know what you mean, Tamsin agreed. When I think back to who I was before I met you, I barely recognize that lonely young woman. I barely recognize myself either, Dawson admitted. I was so focused on the ranch, on proving myself, on maintaining what my father built. I did not understand that there was so much more to life. Do you have any regrets? Tamsin asked, though she already knew the answer. Not a single one, Dawson said firmly. Every decision I have made since the day you warned me about that storm has been influenced by you, by our partnership, by the life we built together, and every one of those decisions has been better because of you. Tamsin smiled, squeezing his hand. I feel the same way. You took a chance on me, on my predictions, when you had every reason to be skeptical. You believed in me, you supported my work, you never tried to diminish or control me. You gave me freedom to be fully myself. Because you are extraordinary exactly as you are, Dawson said. I never wanted to change you, Tamsin. I just wanted to be part of your life. They talked long into the night, reminiscing about the years they had shared, laughing over memories of their children's antics, discussing plans for the future. It was one of those perfect evenings that would stand out in memory, a crystallization of everything that made their relationship special. As the new century approached, bringing with it changes and modernization, the Aldridge family remained rooted in the land and in each other. The ranch adapted to new technologies and markets, incorporating innovations while maintaining the core values that Dawson's father had established. The Hartley Weather Service evolved as well, incorporating telegraph communications and more sophisticated instruments while still relying on Tamsin's observational expertise. In 1901, Grace left for college in Boston, a bittersweet moment for Tamsin. She was proud of her daughter's ambition and intelligence, but she missed her terribly. They corresponded regularly through letters, and Grace's accounts of life in the East were fascinating, describing a world very different from the ranch life she had known. Daniel, now nearly 20, was taking on more responsibility at the ranch, working alongside his father to manage the operation. He had grown into a capable, thoughtful young man, and Dawson felt confident that the ranch would be in good hands when the time came for him to step back. Thomas, at 16, was attending the State University to study engineering, with plans to develop improved weather monitoring instruments for his mother's service. Sarah, at 14, was splitting her time between schoolwork and learning everything she could from Tamsin about weather prediction. One afternoon in the late summer of 1902, Tamsin was standing in her office reviewing weather patterns when she felt an odd sensation. It was similar to the feeling she got before major storms, but different somehow. The air felt charged, heavy with potential, but the sky was relatively clear. She stepped outside, frowning as she tried to understand what her instincts were telling her. Sarah appeared beside her. Mother, do you feel it too? Something is coming, but I cannot identify what it is. Tamsin nodded slowly. Yes, I feel it, but I'm not sure what it means. Over the next several days, the feeling persisted and intensified. Tamsin consulted all of her instruments and observations, but nothing pointed to an obvious weather event. The barometric pressure was stable, the wind patterns were normal, and there were no significant storm systems visible. Yet the sensation that something significant was approaching did not abate. On the fourth day, Dawson found Tamsin on the porch, staring at the horizon with a troubled expression. What is wrong, he asked, immediately concerned. I do not know, Tamsin admitted, frustration evident in her voice. I feel like something major is coming, but I cannot predict what it is. It is like my instincts are trying to tell me something, but I cannot interpret the message. Dawson sat beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. Could it be something other than weather? Could you be sensing something else? Tamsin considered that. Maybe. My grandmother once told me that sometimes our instincts respond to things beyond just atmospheric conditions. She said there were times she knew that significant change was coming, even if she could not identify exactly what form it would take. Whatever it is, we will face it together, Dawson assured her. 2 days later, a rider arrived at the ranch with news that answered the question of what Tamsin had been sensing. Oil had been discovered on the southern portion of the Aldridge property, a significant deposit that had the potential to transform their financial situation even beyond what the cattle operation provided. Geologists had been surveying the area without the family's knowledge, following leads from other oil discoveries in Texas, and they wanted to discuss mineral rights. Tamsin realized that what she had been sensing was not weather at all, but the approach of this major change to their lives. Her instincts had been responding to the convergence of events and people that would bring this news, a demonstration that her abilities extended beyond just meteorological prediction into a broader intuitive awareness. The oil discovery presented both opportunities and challenges. Dawson and Tamsin spent weeks carefully considering their options, consulting with lawyers and oilmen, weighing the potential benefits against the disruption that oil drilling would bring to the ranch. Eventually, they negotiated a deal that allowed for oil extraction on a portion of the property while preserving the cattle operation and the land they loved. The royalties from the oil provided substantial wealth, but Tamsin and Dawson remained grounded in their values. They used the money to further expand Tamsin's charitable work, to establish a proper meteorological station that served the entire region, and to ensure that their children and future grandchildren would have security. But they did not change their lifestyle dramatically or lose sight of what truly mattered to them. In 1905, Grace returned from the East with a teaching degree and a fiancé, a kind young professor she had met at college. The wedding was held at the ranch, a joyous occasion that brought together family and friends from across the state. Watching her daughter marry a good man who clearly adored her, Tamsin felt profound gratitude for the life she had lived and the family she had helped create. Daniel married the following year to a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property. She was a practical, capable young woman who fit seamlessly into the Aldridge family. Within 2 years, Daniel and his wife presented Tamsin and Dawson with their first grandchild, a healthy baby boy they named after Dawson. The years continued to pass, marked by the normal rhythms of ranch life and family milestones. Thomas married and continued his work developing meteorological instruments, making significant contributions to the field of weather prediction. Sarah eventually took over much of the day-to-day operation of the Hartley Weather Service, her abilities matching and eventually exceeding her mother's. She never married, content with her work and her role in the family business. As Dawson and Tamsin aged into their 50s and then 60s, they gradually stepped back from the active management of both the ranch and the weather service, allowing their children to take over. But they remained involved, offering advice and wisdom gained from decades of experience. Most importantly, they continued to enjoy each other's company, finding joy in the simple pleasures of time spent together. One evening in the spring of 1920, Tamsin and Dawson sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. They were both in their early 60s now, their hair gray and their bodies showing the wear of lives fully lived, but their love for each other had not diminished. If anything, it had deepened with time, matured into something even more profound than the passionate romance of their youth. "Do you remember that first storm?" Tamsin asked, a question she had asked before but never tired of revisiting. "Every detail," Dawson replied. "I remember how you looked when you arrived at the ranch, so determined and certain. I remember thinking that I had never met anyone quite like you." "I was terrified you would not listen," Tamsin confessed, "that I would fail to convince you and your cattle would be lost. But I did listen," Dawson said, "because even though I barely knew you, I could see the conviction in your eyes. I could hear the certainty in your voice, and something in me recognized that you were offering me something precious, something I should not dismiss." "You saved more than your herd by listening," Tamsin said softly. "You saved me too. You gave me purpose and partnership and love. You gave me everything." Dawson took her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her weathered skin. "We saved each other," he said, "and we built something beautiful together, a family, a legacy, a life worth living." Tamsin leaned against him, feeling his steady heartbeat, surrounded by the sounds of the ranch that had become her home. Their children were settled and happy, their grandchildren were thriving, and the businesses they had built continued to serve the community. The weather service that had started with Tamsin's grandmother's teachings had evolved into a respected meteorological station that provided forecasts across the entire region. The ranch that Dawson's father had founded had grown into one of the most successful operations in Texas, managed now by Daniel with the same integrity and care that had always characterized the Aldridge name. More than all of that, though, was the simple fact of two people who had found each other against the odds and had chosen every single day to love and support each other. That was the real success, the true legacy that mattered more than land or money or reputation. As the sun set over the Texas landscape, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Tamsin felt complete peace. She had lived a life full of purpose and meaning, full of love and family and contribution. She had taken the knowledge her grandmother had given her and had used it not just to predict the weather, but to build something lasting and good. "Thank you," she whispered to Dawson, "for listening that day, for believing in me, for choosing me." "Thank you," Dawson whispered back, "for warning me, for trusting me, for loving me." They sat together as the stars began to emerge, two people who had become one through years of shared experience and unwavering commitment. The story of the woman who could read the weather like no other and the cowboy who listened and saved his whole herd had become a legend in the region, told and retold as an example of courage, trust, and the power of unlikely partnerships. But for Tamsin and Dawson, it was simply their story, the beginning of a love that had sustained them through decades and would continue until their final breaths. They had built something extraordinary together, not because they were extraordinary people, but because they had recognized something precious when they found it and had nurtured it with dedication and care. Years later, when both had passed on peacefully in their 80s, their children and grandchildren gathered to remember them. The stories were shared, the memories cherished, and the legacy celebrated. The ranch continued, managed now by grandchildren who carried on the family traditions. The weather service continued, with Sarah and later her nieces and nephews maintaining the expertise that Tamsin had developed. But more than institutions or businesses, what endured was the example Tamsin and Dawson had set, of two people who had trusted each other in a moment of crisis and had built that trust into something that lasted a lifetime, of a woman who had known her worth even when others dismissed her, and a man who had been wise enough to recognize that worth, of a partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and deep, abiding love. The copper sky that had appeared that June morning in 1881 had been a warning of the storm to come, but it had also been a sign of something else, something neither Tamsin nor Dawson could have predicted. It had been the beginning of their story, the moment when two separate paths converged into one shared journey. And what a journey it had been. Full of storms weathered and challenges overcome, full of children raised and grandchildren cherished, full of work that mattered and contributions that helped others. But most of all, full of love, the kind of love that transforms ordinary days into something precious, that turns a house into a home, and that makes a life worth living. In the end, that was the true miracle. Not Tamsin's ability to read the weather, though that was remarkable, but the fact that two people had found each other in the vastness of West Texas and had recognized that they were meant to be together. They had listened to what mattered, both the warnings in the sky and the stirrings in their hearts, and they had acted on that knowledge with courage and faith. The legacy of Tamsin Hartley and Dawson Aldridge lived on in their descendants, in the businesses they had built, in the community they had served, and in the love story that became part of the regional folklore. Future generations would point to them as examples of what was possible when people combined skill and dedication with openness to partnership and love. The ranch land they had loved stretched out under the Texas sky, the same sky that Tamsin had read for so many years. The weather patterns continued their eternal cycle, predictable or to those who knew how to look, mysterious to those who did not. And somewhere in that vastness, in the wind that whispered through the grass and the clouds that built and dissipated, was the echo of a love story that had begun with a warning about a storm and had grown into something that would never be forgotten. Tamsin had read the weather like no other, seeing what others could not see, knowing what others could not know. Dawson had listened when it mattered most, trusting when others would have doubted, and in doing so he had saved not just his herd, but had opened the door to a future neither of them could have imagined. Together they had built a life of meaning and purpose, of family and legacy, of love that endured beyond their mortal years. And that, in the end, was the greatest prediction of all, the one that Tamsin's grandmother might have foreseen but could never have fully described. That a young woman with an unusual gift and a young man with an open mind would meet on a day when the sky turned copper, and that from that meeting would come a love story for the ages, a partnership that would change not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone they touched. The story of Tamsin and Dawson became a reminder that sometimes the most important predictions are not about the weather at all, but about the human heart. That sometimes listening to warnings that seem impossible saves more than just material things. It saves souls from loneliness and lives from emptiness. And that sometimes when two people are brave enough to trust each other in a moment of crisis, they discover something far more valuable than safety or success. They discover love that lasts forever, love that weathers every storm, love that builds something beautiful and lasting and true.